Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thrive in 2025, a monthly webinar series brought to you by ARCpoint Labs, your single source employer solutions provider, empowering business leaders to create compliant, high-performing, safe, and healthy workplaces that thrive. Today's Thriving Thursday topic, Ask the Expert Live, a behind-the-curtains conversation about background checks. My name is Ryan West, your host and Thrive specialist. I'm proud to be sharing the virtual floor today with the CRA doctor himself, host of Background Check Radio, Mr. Kevin Bachman. Now, before we officially begin this fireside chat with Kevin, I have a few brief announcements. First things first, there's a lot of people working behind the scenes to make this Thrive webinar series a success. So to the entire ARCpoint team, our corporate staff, our team of dedicated owners across the US who live and breathe excellence every day, so very much for your continued support and the work that you do. Second, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted to ARCpoint's website by tomorrow morning. So if you like what you hear, you'd like an encore presentation, or if you think a client or maybe a colleague could benefit by listening to the recording, please check out the recording. Simply visit arcpointlabs.com. And in the top right corner, you'll see Employer Solutions. Click on that. You'll get a drop down, and then you're going to want to click on View Corporate Webinars. We have a variety of webinars archived in that page featuring a variety of speakers and topics, which of course you're welcome to listen to. Third, ARCpoint is proud provider with HRCI and SHRM. So if you are a credentialed HR professional, you'll receive one RCE and one PDC at the end of today's session. But to receive these credits and a certificate of attendance, and this goes for everyone, you from start to finish. Fourth, we invite you to spend just a moment of your time at the end of the webinar to complete the post-webinar survey. A link will be posted in the chat towards the end of the hour. Simply click on the link, follow the prompts, and give us your honest feedback. Your feedback, which we comb through, right, we reread line for line, it helps us to ensure that these webinars are worth every second of your valuable time. Which brings me to my fifth and final announcement. In this virtual, fast-paced world in which we all reside, I believe that time and attention are our most precious commodities and currencies. And both are finite, and how we spend them is important. To make the most of your time today, you're encouraged to interact with each other, and of course, with our expert, Kevin Bachman, by using the chat and Q&A feature. Now, we're doing something a little bit different today. We're doing something called a fireside chat. Conversation, if you will, between myself and Kevin, and between Kevin and you all, the audience. What this means is there's no presentation slide deck. So you might want to take some notes. If you don't want to take detailed notes, what I encourage you to do is just write down the time, kind of like the timestamp. And then you can visit our archived webinar to listen to that discussion topic or talking point once again. Now, the first half of today's session is going to be a conversation between Kevin and myself. And this is going to be driven largely by the learning objectives, the 4 learning objectives that you saw during the registration process. I'm also, peppered somewhat or influenced somewhat by the questions that you submitted during the registration process. The second half of today's webinar, the last 25, 30 minutes or so, we're going to change gears and give the mic to Kevin, and he'll be able to interact directly with you, answering the questions that you submit. Now, this is important. There's going to be probably a lot of good questions today for Kevin, and we don't want to miss them. So if you have a question, please post it using the Q&A function to make sure that Kevin can get to it. You can post anytime between now and the end of the webinar. If you have just a general comment or a story you'd like to share with one another, please use the chat function. Let's go ahead and get familiar with these functions by using the chat. Please go to the chat, and if you would, please share where you're logging in from. And also, if you're comfortable doing so, your current company, your current role. I'll start by just saying I'm logging in from my home in Zionsville, Indiana, which is a northwest suburb of Indianapolis. I like to say I live in Indianapolis, but I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh. I grew up in the foothills of Pittsburgh, PA, about 20 miles north. So a huge Steelers fan, huge Nittany Lions fan. Anybody leading us off here in the chat? Tacoma, Washington. Thanks so much. Cynthia, welcome. Allison, good to see you on. Welcome from Lidditz, PA. Candace, Rockhill, welcome everybody. Keep the introductions flowing. And as you're doing right now, use the chat for intros, for general comments. If you got a question for Kevin, please use the Q&A so we don't miss it. And on that note, I'm so pleased to introduce our guest today, a bona fide expert of his craft, partner at iCubed Advisors, LLC, host of Background Check Radio, chair for the Professional Background Screening Association Credentialing Council, the active speaker at SHRM, and a trusted voice with over 20 years of experience in the background screening industry, Mr. Kevin Bachman. Kevin, welcome, and thanks so much for
Hi,
being here today.
hi everybody. Ryan, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys, and I'm looking forward to spending the next hour together.
Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing since we got a fireside chat, Kevin. I was
Yeah,
thinking
that
about
picture
maybe
looks a little
getting
better than the one that everybody's looking at.
yeah, I thought about setting this up in front of my fireplace, but considering it's 93 degrees outside, thought that maybe not the best idea. But we've got a lot of great questions on the docket, all of course about background training, screening background checks. But before we get to those, I think we should start with maybe the basics. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and also how and why you chose background screening as your profession?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. And that last part, nobody chooses to become a background check professional. We just all kind of fall into this industry. My background is in radio and television news, and as you look at my office behind you, you mentioned your fireplace. I have the office of a 14-year-old boy. I'm a couple hundred miles from the Carrier Dome and Yankee Stadium. I'm from Rochester, New York, originally, and found this industry while just pursuing a graduate degree in college. I thought I'd go right back into media once I finished up my studies. And there was an opportunity to join a really small background check company doing employment education verifications. I thought to myself, well, this is like reporting. You're gathering facts, you're telling a story, you're just doing it on a piece of paper instead of in front of a microphone. I'll do this for a couple of years and then I'll go back into broadcasting. My goal when I was younger was to do play-by-play sports.
Mm.
And 25 years later, here we are. The graduate program did get finished, but this is kind of the career path I embarked on. Um, for about 15 years, I worked inside of a screening company. About 10 years ago, Sterling, was then the largest screening company in the world out of New York City, bought our company. And once the integration and the merger went through, I saw an opportunity to really serve many different people within the screening space. So I've worked really over my career with employers, vendors behind the scenes, other background check companies, really help them advance the industry, improve quality, improve accuracy, support service. Background checks can be a very nebulous and often scary topic for people. I'm excited to do this because we're going to look behind the scenes and challenge some of those myths. But really, for the last 10 years, I've been an advisor to the screening space. Funny, the other side of this wall, I'm the guy who forgot to start the dishwasher. But here, I'm excited to share with you kind of some of the tips and tricks of the industry. And I'm really looking forward to spending the next 50 minutes together.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I think our audience members are in for a real treat. I've had a chance to speak several times, and this, and I've shared this openly. Worker well-being performance, that's my wheelhouse, that's my expertise. Background screening, background checks, they're not. So I'm hosting today, but I'm also a student today. I'm learning today, just like everybody else is. So I think a great segue to that, thanks for the intro, is maybe for somebody who is entry level like myself. Maybe they're just starting their careers in HR. Maybe it's a veteran or seasoned leader that's starting to conduct background checks or wanting to. What is a background check exactly? Does it differ from background screening? And why might employers want to utilize them?
So I've done this for 25 years and I can't tell you what a background check is.
Hmm.
Now what do you mean? Why are we here? Why are we doing this together? Um, Background checks like a bag of groceries. How much does a bag of groceries cost? What did you put in the bag of groceries? I don't know. So I tend to think of it. It's like, well, did you put cabbage in the bag of groceries? Put caviar in the bag of groceries. So I think a background check's in much the same way. We tend to think of things, and as humans, we look for trends and simplicity, and of course, but a background check can mean a bunch of different things. A background check and a background screen, those are interchangeable
Okay.
words. You may hear me use the word like end user and employer or client. Those all mean the same things. A consumer report is also the same as a background check. Consumer report is the legal definition. So, that's part of the answer right there is there's a number of things that are kind of very similar. When we dive a little deeper, and I'll try and give I don't a short answer to the question. We talk about different products, a criminal background check. Well, there's a lot of different variations of a criminal background check. An employment verification, a lot of different types of employment verifications. So from a product specific standpoint, there's different iterations when we think of what our end users or our employer clients want.
Mm,
Clients who work in a hospital may want different things than clients in a manufacturing facility. So there really is an art mixed in with the science to this space.
yeah, I love that analogy too. You got me thinking already. That's it. It depends exactly what the client is looking for. What do they need? What are their needs? And I wonder how many employers or clients even know what they need. I think that maybe segues us nicely into the third question, which is for human resource professionals, other business leaders who may think all background checks are equal or basically the same. I think you just challenged that assumption, but would you want to expand on that a little bit more for the HR pro who's thinking, well, we're using like a cookie cutter approach, not really zooming in and analyzing what are their exact needs.
Yeah, and there really is a mix in the marketplace when we think of not only the screening providers, but the employers. Not everybody needs something boutique and specialized. So
Mm,
sometimes cookie cutter is okay.
okay.
There's a reason that there are general standards, which I'm happy to talk about for the next 45 minutes.
Mm,
There's reasons that there are some tried and true methods. So not every employer or provider, such as ARCpoint, needs to go down the rabbit hole with every user. The paradox of choice is real.
mm,
It's easier to choose one cereal box when you have five choices than when you have 50 choices. So I tend to think of and work with employers and other screening companies really on the broad basics, your employment verification products, your criminal verification products, your identity products. And then for others and the ArcPoint community, I think is well versed in this. The regulated products, the occupational health or the drug screening products, DOT regulations, FDA regulations, and really there are times where getting into the details is really helpful, and there are times that like we'll hold off. I don't need that. That's too much. That's too complicated. So what I think about as an advisor, but also um, uh, um, a provider, somebody who sells these to employers, is kind of understanding when is too much. When do you want to lead your client down a different path towards simplicity? Or when do they know that your universe, your workforce is a little more complicated, a little more regulated. We need to talk about these things too. So that just comes with time and experience and resources like this, forums like the one
yeah.
that ArcPoint is putting on to help find that happy balance.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. For everybody still joining us or trickling in, we're with Kevin Bachman, expert background screening with iCubed Advisors, host of Background Check Radio. I have several more questions I'm going to ask for Kevin that align with, or to Kevin that align with our learning objectives. Please go ahead and start thinking about some questions you'd like to ask Kevin by submitting them and using the Q&A function. So if you got a question for a background screening expert, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. We'll make sure Kevin gets to those the last 30 minutes of today's session. So the theme is kind of pulling back the curtain, behind the curtains
Yes.
of the background screening process. So what is the behind the curtain part of background checks? What does that look like?
I
And what's
love
going
that.
on that most HR leaders don't see?
I love that question. Most of the data comes from the same place, and a lot of the data comes from the same companies. And I kind of think of two different things there when I say that. Most of the data comes from the same place. Well, if information, criminal record information, comes from a county courthouse or a parish courthouse, a shout out to my friends in Metairie and Baton Rouge that are here. New Orleans, Louisiana, it's our adopted home. My kids' middle names are Jackson and Nola.
Oh, okay.
So I smile a lot when I see, the Louisiana locations in here today. Um, so it's coming from a courthouse. Well, regardless of your vendor, regardless of which company your employers are doing background checks with, they're getting it from the same source. So your employers that will connect with you guys as franchise owners and say, well, I'm with this company or that company, or that, like, the data's coming from the county courthouse, regardless of who the vendor they are with is. The other is, so that's, coming from the source. The other is the data provider or the partner behind the scenes. The background check company that your clients are using now will probably all collectively work with the same vendors behind the scenes. For example, driver information, a motor vehicle record check. It is rare that that information comes from that background check company specifically. There's two or three vendors behind the scenes that assemble and provide that information to the background check company, who then will deliver it to the end user or to the employer. And that will repeat itself down the product line, where it is, some of the what I call fulfillment will be done by the background check company. Um, the employment verification or an education verification, but often the criminal record information will come from a partner down the supply chain who
I see.
specializes in just that.
I see. Makes sense. Makes sense. Red flags. What are some common red flags in a background check? Now, how should HR and second part, how should HR professionals think about a failing background report?
So, I try to be lighthearted with this because background checks can be a dour, boring subject sometimes. I'm not trying to be glib. But red flags, I don't know. Um, Here's why. There are what we call different hit rates. And different hit rates is the presence of criminal record activity or fraudulently claimed educational credentials, employment history that doesn't exist, etc. Different companies, different employers have different standards. There are things that make you very well qualified to work in one industry that will make you very unqualified to work in another. So
Hmm.
when I get a question or I think about red flags, that's based more on just my experience of working with employers over 20 years on what is or isn't tolerated. A background
Hmm.
check company is, and please interrupt me if you need to, Ryan. A background check company specializes in obtaining and providing information. They do not specialize in helping you determine whether or not somebody should or shouldn't work for your company. In fact, that's a line they really can't cross. They don't want to cross it, but also there's a variety of laws and regulations that say they can't cross that. That is your choice. So when we think of how to answer that question or guide employers or franchise owners who are looking to sell these products to their clients, these services, we can't just say what I just said, slam the door and walk away.
Hmm.
There needs to be some collaboration, some participation in this process. One thing I think about are called the green factors. The green factors are guidelines issued by the EEOC maybe 10, 12 years ago at this point. And the EEOC basically asks employers to think of three things. They ask them to think about the nature of the offense. What was the offense? When did the offense occur? They will ask you to think about the severity of the offense, right? A little bit tied to the nature of the offense, but, like, what was it? When was it? How severe was it? And they also ask you to think of the job relatedness. Does it or doesn't it pertain to the work that the organization is doing? Um, I'll give you a good example on the time relatedness. Was the offense 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, or 6 years ago? What's that look like in the hiring process? I will say a misnomer is criminal record equals rejection from a job.
Mm,
By and large, that really doesn't happen. Um, And I think that's a good thing because the applicant pool, discrimination, et cetera, like it's good to have conversations with applicants. It's good to ask them after, not necessarily before, but after. Okay, can you explain this offense? That's what EEOC regulators, plaintiffs, attorneys are kind of looking for. That provides a higher degree of legal protection. Um, but these are the things I think of when I hear about red flags. As providers and partners, which is what ARCpoint is to its employees that are doing screens, a great answer is not the first part of my answer. Hey, we
yeah,
can't do anything. It's your decision. Click. The better answer is, okay, here are the things to think about. Here's what we've learned from our experiences. And you try and find a happy medium there.
yeah. Okay, great, great. Now
And we got some great questions rolling in already,
we
so I
do, which I
can't
love.
wait to
Yeah,
tackle those.
I love.
Yep.
So you've mentioned in past talks that some screening requests can actually increase risk. Can you give an example of how, well-meaning HR policy might backfire?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you said it right there, well intentioned.
Mm,
It usually is not, although I will give an example. Um, I'll give an example of probably something that happens way too much now and it shouldn't. Um, Social media screening, I will say. Partnering with a company like ARCpoint, partnering with a vendor behind the scenes to obtain data in a non-discriminatory way in that's not just an HR manager Googling or looking up on Facebook, oh, I saw this post, this guy's out. That's an example of probably something that, isn't necessarily well intentioned because, yeah, sometimes you just kind of get
yeah.
a little too curious for your own good. Keep it with a provider, keep it consistent, keep it clean, keep it professional. Um, but something that is probably well intentioned that can backfire sometimes is uh, applying different standards within a company and doing so inconsistently.
Mm,
We see that a lot through a product called continuous monitoring. You do a background check pre-hire. I do not think it is a good idea to do a background check pre-hire and then let somebody work with inside of your building for 8 years and never do anything ever again. So I do
mm,
recommend check-ins. Continuous monitoring is a term that's a term in our space. That's a product. Well, what happens inside of that continuous monitoring if you find an offense and it's a janitor and okay, the decision is made to disqualify the janitor? What happens if the chief of sales or the chief revenue officer has the same offense? And then a corporate leader decides, well, the janitor has to go, but the chief of sales, the other head of sales can stay. It's not intended to be malicious, not intended to be discriminatory, but those are some of the things that well-intentioned behind the scenes are just things that need to be considered. And there are a number of organizations I've worked with in the past that said, hey, continuous monitoring, that slope is too slippery. The example I just gave is a real one. Leaders will not walk the CRO to the parking lot. They will walk the janitor to the parking lot. And a
mm,
lot of HR people are like, I know this is how this is going to go down. I can't use the product.
mm. So a couple things there.
Thinking somebody is, your audience has a firmer grasp on this than I am, so I'm not going to pretend to be the expert that your audience is on what I'm about to say next. But reasonable suspicion, occupational health drug testing, similar things, just inconsistent application of the
Yeah.
product or an outcome.
Reasonable suspicion, supervisory training is one of the things that I do
Yes,
frequently bi-monthly actually for ARCpoint. And we definitely preach consistency.
yes,
Be
exactly.
consistent, be fair, treat everybody with the same level of professionalism, respect.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's certainly hit home for me, you saying that. You mentioned a couple things there. One, social media. Is that Are background check providers expanding into things like social media, or is that still mostly on HR?
Social media is a service that is offered by, I would say at this point in 2025, every
Mm,
background screening company or CRA. You'll hear me say CRA. Um, CRA means Consumer Reporting Agency. Just like I said, Consumer Report is the technical definition. Consumer Reporting Agency is the technical definition of a background check company. So, sitting here in 2025, unlike a decade ago, you should be able to get a social media screen from your provider and from ARCpoint. I do not recommend that anybody just fire up the Google machine inside of HR at a location and do this themselves. Now, a broken clock is right twice a day. There is litigation around just that, which is, hey, I fired up Google and I found something, and my screening product didn't. That's more of a conversation piece with end users, with employers around just, the risks associated with doing that compared to the one time a year it's going to play out. That's a slippery slope. That's a more complicated conversation that involves HR and legal, but broadly speaking, I do not advise employers to do things themselves.
okay. Okay. For for those who are looking for a background check partner, maybe they have a current partner and they've really never scrutinized the level of service they get or the type of checks that they're running. What How do they choose a background check partner? What should HR leaders, other business leaders look for? Are there any green flags, any red flags?
I think that's an awesome question because that kind of goes back to my comment around, hey, what's in a bag of groceries?
Hmm.
How deep do we need to look? How deep don't we need to look, etc. One thing I think about is the candidate experience. What are we asking our candidates to do as part of this process? How easy or more challenging do we make it for them? I will say, doing this for 25 years, many employers will I don't want to say talk a good game, but they will place a higher priority on what they say to you on candidate experience relative to when push comes to shove, how important it truly is. Because there's other factors. There's price, there's turnaround time, and then there is the ease of use for the employer, the HR person, the recruiter. So I will say, yes, candidate experience is important, but the experience you are giving that client is even higher. I don't necessarily mean customer service, although there are a number of large companies and clients of theirs have expressed feedback on, hey man, I call 1-800 number and I got to give a 19-digit code and it gets assigned to a ticket and somebody somewhere and like I just can't get an answer. I can't get clarity on something, right? So that is important. Support and service inside of the individual background check. I'm thinking more when I talk about ease of use, I'm thinking about how the program is run for that employer. Are we doing quarterly check-ins or aren't we? Are we having detailed conversations around the needs of their constituency and their stakeholders? Is our technology a burden or is it a blessing? And as we all know, in the course of our personal and professional lives, it can be both. So I think of ease of use for the recruiters and the HR people. I think of candidate experience. I think of cost and speed and accuracy, and we've had some questions flowing in from those. I think accuracy is baked into the cake right now. I think you're not really going to know whether something's accurate or not until you actually use it. So if a provider is out there saying, I'm accurate, I'm accurate, I'm accurate, I kind of want to know the next 10 words because while there's a lot of litigation in this space, there are less than you would think, again, firing up Google, you fire up Google background check errors and you will see a million plaintiffs' attorneys, hunting for cases. You will see some horror stories on background checks for Mark Jones that are done in error, which happens with somebody named Mark Jones, which will happen to somebody named Ryan West. But there are tens of millions of background checks conducted by this industry each year, and the rate of errors is minuscule, relatively speaking. So when you're having conversations with users or potential clients, um, I would make sure to talk about the entire program and not just we're accurate or not just we'll keep you safe, because the interests of buyers go beyond that.
Got it. Well, one of the questions, my last question, I was gonna ask as a
Yeah.
follow-up, and transition to you interacting with the audience, which I like you said, a lot of great questions coming in. Those listening in, please take a moment, come up with a question, and present it. You've got 29 minutes with a
Yeah.
background screening expert, so please
I
go.
could do this for hours. I got a baseball game at 6:30 tonight, but otherwise,
Yeah.
I got all day.
I know you could too, and I love listening to an expert because they don't need it. They don't need a slide deck. They don't need a resource list. They just speak from experience, which is so clear that you are. So as a follow-up to everything you just said, and you've danced around this. You implied certain things. You've mentioned this a couple times. We're talking about what components are most attractive to various clients. But I'll go ahead and transition now and just ask a question submitted by Sultan Ali in the chat. And he says, what makes a background check provider more attractive to a client? Speed, price, accuracy, compliance, etc.
I think the first thing I think of wasn't one of the examples, and it's okay. We're all learning here. I think the breadth of product offerings. I think, and I'll try and give two answers to a question at the same time, because I also want to describe kind of what are those standard background check products. I make my cabbage and caviar joke at the beginning, but there are some real bread and butter products that should be part of every background check, right? A criminal county, a county criminal verification, or parish, of course, go Tigers. Um, a education or employment verification, a motor vehicle check. Job specific, though. I don't think everybody needs a motor vehicle check if they're, in an office as a receptionist. Credit check for people with financial responsibilities, running a cash register or access to a checkbook. I don't think a credit check is necessarily needed for, again, the receptionist. But I do think a credit check might be useful for a janitor who's in the building at 3 in the morning with no supervision and access to offices and desks, et cetera. So the job relatedness is what I think of when I think of services. I think of, and then I'll kind of segue to the question you asked, Ryan. I do think what is called a multi-jurisdictional criminal database search is very relevant. Sometimes you'll hear the word national used interchangeably with that. It's important to note it is not national. There's no one source. There's no one database. There's no, I'll use the FBI as an example. The Department of Justice has published research in, a couple times over the last few decades that says, hey, our database is for law enforcement. Our database is not for background checks. Our database does not have complete, accurate, and up-to-date information, which is a federal law standard for providing a consumer report, complete, accurate, and up-to-date. So you'll have data sources that say, hey, I don't know if this is complete, accurate, and up-to-date. Use me as a tool. Use me as a resource, but don't slap my data on the piece of paper that you're giving the employer. So some of these products that we're talking about are client facing. We did a parish search in Orleans County, right? The database search is kind of the spaghetti against the wall. Hey, there are databases out there for commercial purpose, hundreds of millions of records. Maybe something popped up in Glendale, um, for Ryan West. Well, how do I know if it's Ryan West? There's a missing date of birth. There's not a name match, et cetera. So those are things kind of behind the scenes. Again, that the behind the curtains products and processes in our space. But when I put them all together, these are the things that I think of are components, another word for product, for most screening services. Now, as we segue right into the question you asked on, um, what are buyers interested in? What are we as ARCpoint partners kind of looking to communicate around? I think of breadth of service, right? Um, Clients don't need everything, but there's probably 20 or 25 products that I consider, standard background check offerings. Most companies need five or six. But boy, if you have 20 things you can do really well, that's impressive. If you have 20 things you can do, you can probably do my five or six. So that's one of the first things I look at. I think what is the screening provider capable of? Then I think of again the use of technology. There are some products and some methods of obtaining information where the world has really caught up and it is as easy as one button. There are some legacy providers in our space that say, nope, I don't trust the computers, never have, never will. In some parts of the country, that's absolutely true. In other parts of the country, the world has passed those providers by. So if I'm an ARCpoint franchise owner and I'm talking to somebody and I'm hearing turnaround times of 4 or 5 days in Iowa when it should take 4 or 5 hours, these are kind of the things that I think about where I can compete now with a provider. Uh, Cost, accuracy. You should be able to get a pretty standard comprehensive background check for less than $50.
Got it.
If somebody's selling to you for five, that worries me. If they say I'll give it to you for $5 in 5 minutes, that's a red flag. Data sources aren't very good, the processes aren't very good. But it shouldn't take 5 days either. So there's really a balance here, and it's, the familiarity with some of these data points I'm throwing out, with some of these terms I'm throwing out, will really help the listeners here kind of understand when they're having a conversation with somebody, how to kind of respond and react accordingly.
Got it. Got it. Well, as you were talking, more and more questions were coming
Yes.
in, perhaps based on what you were saying. So, Kevin, I'll give you the virtual mic. If you can see the Q&A, there's three questions there. We've got numerous questions submitted in the chat. We got 15, 20 minutes to get to them. I'll need three or four to close, and I'll give you the virtual mic.
Let's do as many as we can. So as many
Yeah.
as we can. Okay, so does a dispute rate? So dispute rate, that's a great question, right? A dispute rate is kind of an internal term that demonstrates accuracy. And what is a dispute? A dispute is, well, kind of what it sounds. I think this is wrong. I don't think this is me. This is somebody, this is a different Ryan West. This is a different Kevin Bachman. Employers, before they are permitted to deny employment on the basis of a background check, have to do two things. And I'm blending this answer in with a couple compliance questions that I've seen come in. So, your employers, your clients, if they use a background check to make a hiring decision, before they can deny employment, they have to do, required by federal law, two things. They have to provide the applicant with a copy of the background check. They have to inform them on who conducted the background check, and they have to provide contact information that says, hey, if you think this is wrong, here's the number, here's the vendor, call them, and they'll sort that out. And then nothing happens for a period of, let's say, 5 business days. That's a recommended time frame in the industry. Nothing happens, the candidate doesn't dispute, or maybe the candidate does call and dispute, right? And now the background check company tells the employer, hey, we have a dispute, right? But let's say none of that happens. If a dispute happens, the background check vendor has 30 days by law to resolve that. I recommend they try and resolve it in 3, not 30, because the company has a business decision to make, your client, a lot of emotion tied in this process. A lot of disputes, a lot of lawsuits will come from poor handling of disputes. You guys don't want any of that. But let's say none of that happens. Step 1 is you send the letter with that notification. Step 2 is 5 business days later, 7 business days later, a second letter goes out. Second letter says everything the first letter says, and now it says, this is why we're not hiring you. The reason I wanted to talk through that so specifically is you can't just take the background report, look at it and say, I hate this guy, I'm not going to hire him, throw it in the garbage can and move on with your day. Consumers have rights. So when I think of compliance, when I think of dispute rates, and what I encourage end users to ask, Dispute rate and accuracy rate are kind of two sides of the same coin. What's your dispute rate? And a dispute rate should be a very minuscule number. It should start with a zero and then a decimal point, and then there should be at least one zero after it. If a background check company has a dispute rate of like 3%, I mean, just think of that. That's one of every 33 background checks. And if you're a high volume employer doing, 100 background checks a month, do you want to be dealing with this once a week? That's why that dispute rate question matters. That's something I would use if I'm a franchise owner communicating with employers, communicating with your clients. Hey, what's the dispute rate of your vendor right now? And if that number doesn't start with a zero, that's to me is a real great opening. So let's look at a couple others. What's the biggest challenges you see when conducting background checks, and how do you overcome it? The biggest challenge right now, and again, I'm going to answer it two different ways. One is controllable and one isn't. There are some jurisdictions across the country, jurisdictions, counties, interchangeable word. There are some jurisdictions over the county, across country that are getting very stingy with the level of access they are providing public record researchers. And as I hear the thunder now, I worry about my game getting rained out tonight. That creates delays. That creates time delays. There are some areas of the country where you can get the information instantly electronically. There are some areas of the country you can walk into a courthouse and get the information yourself. There are some areas of the country you walk in, you talk to a court employee, you hand them your request, and then you go sit on the court clerk bench for 2 weeks. That creates a whole host of communication issues, timing issues, turnaround time, start time, etc. These differences are very specific. Somebody in Iowa will never come across that 2-week delay that I just described. Somebody in New England, that 2-week delay is built into the time of every background check. So managing client expectations and just communicating with them the expected turnaround time. Yes, every time we fire up a web page and we look at someone, this is in minutes and this is cheap and this is easy. Most of the time it is. But the devil's in the details, and clients are won and lost at that margin. So being open and transparent and communicative with your client on that is very helpful. The second issue I think of is, ironically, that well-intentioned desire. We want to say yes to our clients. We want to call that employer for the 6th time over 6 days because we really need to know that Johnny worked at Taco Bell for 6 months, 6 years ago. At some point, you have to say, I tried hard enough and we're done. That's a tough conversation to have, but it gets better over time. The reason why I recommend sometimes there is a point in which you've done enough, especially on the verification side. Criminal side's different. You can't you can't eject halfway through. You either know whether it's Ryan West or it's not Ryan West. But the verification side, keep calling this employer. What's going to happen is you're going to make that recruiter happy who tells you to keep calling them, but you're going to piss off the entire organization because now the narrative is you're difficult to work with. Now the narrative is it takes too long, etc. So you can definitely win the battle and lose the war with some of the things that you say yes to. I call that accommodate, negotiate, and impose. There are some things as you communicate with your clients when we talk about boutique things or specialized services. Yes, I'm happy to do it. There's others where it's, okay, well, what if we did it this way? What do we do it that way? You make the decision for me, client. We're negotiating. And there's some in which it's just impose. Hey, I'm sorry, I can't do it that way. There's a federal law, there's an industry best practice that precludes that, et cetera. So it's really filtering those things into one of those 3 buckets. All right, more questions as I look at them. What are the most common compliance mistakes employers make during the screening process? One of them I talked through before, what I call the letter process I just described. That's called the adverse action process. It is a 2-step process. It is not a 1-step process. So I talked about you can't just rip up the background check and move on with your life. Another mistake employers will make is they do 1 step of the process, but not the second. They'll say, here's a copy of your report, and then they ghost the candidate. Or they just say, here's a copy of your report, and I'm not going to hire you because of it. Can't do that. You have to do both of those things. That's a common request. Another, or there, that is a mandated by law practice. Another common compliance mistake revolves around consent. You need permission from candidates to do this. And I hope for us that is 1 + 1 = 2, and everybody kind of knew that before signing on to this webinar today. A lot of employers don't know this. They think they can, like there's a form that has to be filled out. The form has to say a lot of things. The form has to be separate from the application, etc. So, working with an employer um, to make sure that they are aware is something that I recommend um, partners do without crossing that line. You can't necessarily do the form for them. Is it your form? Is it somebody else's form? Is it their form? I always encourage it to be their paperwork as employers and not, your paperwork. Again, sometimes saying yes can get you in compliance jail. So again, it's understanding that balance. All right. Um,
Kevin, do you see the
yes.
3 questions submitted using the Q&A?
Yep. I
One
was
from
about
an
to go to that
anonymous and
next.
oh,
Yep. I was
perfect. And then 2 great questions from Valerie as well.
let's see. Yeah, okay. Valerie, I'm gonna answer your second one first. So Valerie asks, how is it that expunged felonies are shown when a criminal background check is conducted by an employer, but is not found on record at a state, county, or city level? So that's the broken clock syndrome. Now, that's not quite the broken clock because the broken clock in that case is not accurate, right? But an employer, this is what I think Valerie is getting at, and she'll throw in the chat if I'm paraphrasing this right. Here's how I think that typically comes across. Hey, I did my Google check and I found this. How come you couldn't find it? You stink. Well, because a Google check has access to information in databases that may not meet what I just said 20 minutes ago is that federal standard, complete, accurate, and up to date. Because by definition, Valerie said it's expunged, right? So if it's expunged and it's expunged correctly, sometimes it is not, and that's a different conversation with a candidate. The paperwork isn't filed right, and the candidate says this is expunged, but no, it's here. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is criminal records that are legitimately expunged that pop up somewhere but aren't found during the background check that we are doing, that you guys are doing. Well, my, again, tongue-in-cheek answer, I would say it nicer with a client on the line, but that's why we're doing the background check this way and not that way. Like, okay, you found the expunged criminal record. Now what are you going to do? You're going to walk the guy off the property because he has an expunged criminal record? Like that's a bigger problem. Like that's a bigger problem. Um, if it's found correctly, if the research is done correctly, if the paperwork is filed correctly, you shouldn't find it at the city, state, or county level. That is the point. So that's another one of those kind of delicate conversations. Trust the experts. We're here to protect you. And again, a lot of it is who am I? So we talk about challenges in this world, like who am I serving? Am I serving the recruiter on the phone call who needs to place somebody in a seat today so they can make money, the organization may, et cetera? Or are we serving the organization? I always like to steer the focus in the conversation around serving the organization. Sometimes that means, hey, I need another day to find out whether this criminal record really is or isn't your Ryan West. Hey, let me make another phone call and get back to you, et cetera. So it's striking that balance between, hey, I would like this now because I got to get moving, I got to fill that seat, and hey, you know what? Let us do this because you chose us for a reason. You chose us to help protect you and your company. Let us do our jobs. And again, these conversations get easier over time. Um, then Valerie had another question about the green factors. Would you say that the green factors are some of the reasons why employers say they are a second chance hirer? But is that on a case by case basis? I don't understand the second part, but yeah, the green factors are really born out of the idea that And again, it's a misnomer. The background check companies are not the reason why nobody's hired, and there's no gotcha here. We're assembling and providing information, whether it is clear or whether it's criminal record information is kind of indifferent to us. We are just looking, assembling, and providing, right? But the green factors are really born out of that idea that, hey, employers, you should consider whether this offense was 6 months ago or 6 years from now. You should consider whether the offense is serious enough or not serious enough. Um, let's just be better people. Let's be kinder people. Not everything, there is a job for everybody, but not everybody is qualified for the right job. One thing I will say is also a challenge for employers, and things that we can talk with our clients about is centralized versus decentralized decision making. I don't advocate really bright line hire, don't hire. I don't mean it like that. I mean in those areas where it is gray. Is this person a good fit? Is this person not a good fit? With decentralized hiring, you may have an organization with 50 locations across the country and 50 HR people sitting in the seat making 19 different choices across those 50 examples. Decentralized because it moves faster and, but sometimes, well, maybe that doesn't sound very consistent to me. Um, so I do advocate for not necessarily purely centralized. I don't think you should have one person making the decision for all 50 locations either. That presents its own set of challenges, but basically a blend of, what consistent decision making, consistent processes. It really can, if you let 50 people make 50 different decisions, it really can be the Wild West. Okay. And of course, as we, get 5 minutes in, Ryan, if you see something that you want me to tackle, because there are more than we have, feel free to be like, no, let's do this one right now.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Kevin. I see
Okay.
we have 151. I think one or maybe two more questions, and then we'll have closing comments.
Okay. There's a question from Connie about ARCpoint, and Ryan, you may tackle that as well in your closing. But yes, I think there are. We do have a person who's contacted ARCpoint due to favorite. Okay. Yeah, I think that's an internal workflow question, but I'd like to highlight that for you guys to either follow up with Connie after the fact or
Yeah, I just actually
and do a
posted a
recap.
response to everyone in the
Okay.
chat
Okay,
right
great.
below that.
Great. Okay. What's the recommended background check for the construction industry? Um, so I would put construction, manufacturing, warehouse. Um, I don't want to get too specific on white collar, blue collar, but certainly a county criminal check. And this question actually gives me an opportunity to talk a little deeper um, on the depth and breadth of a criminal check, right? I have lived in 3 counties over the last 10 years. All of those counties should be searched. You'll hear within the space this thing about 7 years. 7 years to me is basically around how long can or can't you use information based on whether the person was guilty or not guilty. 7 years to me does not mean that's as far back as you should look. Looking and deciding are two different things. I don't want to artificially limit my net, my look back period. So I advocate a broader look back period and then decide what you want to do with it. If somebody is in jail 12 years ago and they searched 60 and they served 6 years, they got out 6 years ago. Am I going to or not going to find that criminal record? I don't know because different providers, different vendors will have different standards on what that look back period is. That's why I advocate a longer look back period. And I also advocate for let's search all of those jurisdictions, not just the one the candidate kind of lives in right now. So when I think of construction and some of the manufacturing industries, I think of a longer look back, not because of the people or the nature of the work. I recommend that across the board. I will recommend some of the database checks, identity verification products are really coming into vogue right now. I'm a big fan of identity solutions, and I'm trying to go fast for you, Ryan. So this will probably be our last question. Um, I don't necessarily recommend credit checks unless there's access to properties. I do recommend some occupational health screening, some drug testing, obviously, with that. And I'm a big fan of employment verifications. I don't always think that education verifications are necessarily warranted, but I do like to know employment history, and I do think that that's a valuable service. 155 on the nose. I can keep going, but I know you needed five. Right.
Yeah, appreciate that, Kevin. And I'll mention this in just a moment, but clearly we weren't able to get to every question today. Some really good questions came through, and I think some really good answers, came back to you all. But if you do have another question for Kevin or follow up, I'll put his email up in just a moment, and you can reach out to him directly. Kevin, you're
Yeah,
shaking
please
your head.
do.
That's okay with you. Okay. So yeah, we got 5 minutes left. A few closing comments. First, as said at the beginning, if you would, please let us know what you thought about today's fireside chat. This was the first time that we've tried this particular format. Usually we do the presentations via PowerPoint or Prezi or something like that. So Kevin, thanks so much for kicking this off with us, and of course your partnership with ARCpoint. I personally don't know a whole lot about background checks, as I said. I know a lot about other things, but we partner with people like Kevin. We have a national network of experts like Kevin for all the different employer solutions we offer. And of course, a lot of our ARCpoint owners themselves are experts on this topic and many other topics, aligned with the services that we offer. So please complete the survey. Let us know what you thought. The link should be posted in the chat right now. Let me see if it is. Right on time. Morgan, thank you so much for that. For those of you who are credentialed HR professionals, please look in the chat as well for your HRCI and SHRM codes and IDs. Now, these will also be listed on your certificate of completion or a certificate of attendance, excuse me, which will be emailed to all participants by end of day next Monday. Okay, so if you can't write them down, that's okay. Which brings us to our final slides here in closing comments. Again, as I said, if you have additional questions for Kevin, feel free to reach out to him directly at kbachman@icubedadvisors.com. That's kbachman@icubedadvisors.com. Pretty straightforward. For those of you wondering, maybe new to the ARCpoint brand, and you're thinking, what services does ARCpoint offer? Well, as you can see here on the screen, we offer a suite of employer solutions that help prevent, identify, and manage a variety of workplace risks. Our services include, but are not limited to, drug testing, random program management, policy development, supervisory training, DOT physicals, employee assistance programming, and of course, background screening. As we discussed today, not all background checks, platforms, or even providers are created equal, right? With ARCpoint's very own platform, Total Reporting, clients have seamless access to background screening, drug testing, and occupational health services, all from a single platform and a single login. So if you're interested in learning more about Total Reporting, go to the Employer Solutions page, click on background screening, and there'll be a little synopsis there of Total Reporting form if you'd like to learn more and speak with an ARCpoint rep, and one will get in touch with you. You can also reach out directly to the provider and have a conversation, or scan this QR code you see on the left-hand side of the screen, fill out the brief survey, and then an ARCpoint rep will happily get in contact with you. I see we're a couple minutes from the top of the hour. Kevin, any closing comments for our listeners?
Yeah, I think a great takeaway is when you're talking to employers or potential clients, understand that the provider they've chosen and are working with right now is more likely than not a surface level decision without the depth of information or an understanding of a lot of the terms that we've discussed here. So don't be surprised if this is considered more of a check the box vendor selection. I don't advocate it, but it often is. I do recommend asking a lot of questions of your not because we're trying to trap them, but we want them to articulate. It's a good way to understand their level of expertise, and it's a good way for them to hear themselves be like, I really don't know a lot about this. So vendor reviews, should be every 2 years, probably. And if they're not doing, again, just I'm looking for hooks. I'm looking for ways to engage and have deeper conversation with potential clients, and often asking them a lot of questions and having them try to articulate it back makes something, hey, maybe I'm not thinking of these things. Maybe I'm not creating the right program for my organization. Maybe I need to learn more. And then you got them.
Love it. Thanks so much, Kevin. How can people find you at your background check radio podcast?
So there's a link in which you can click, but Apple, Google, Spotify, anybody, anywhere you consume your content, you can find Background Check Radio. Also on LinkedIn, iCubed Advisors, myself, my partners. We're always happy to have conversations
Great.
around this topic. So thank you
Wonderful.
for having us today.
Yeah, and I see that Morgan posted that link to your podcast in the chat, so please click on that. On behalf of the entire ARCpoint team, a very special thank you once again to guest expert Kevin Bachman, and thank you all very much for spending your time with us today. Hope to see you at next month's webinar, where we once again help you in your workplace thrive in 2025. See you then.
Thank you, everyone.